The day was stiflingly hot, the kind of heat that clung to your skin like a heavy blanket. Beads of sweat trickled down my forehead as I helped my parents unload boxes from the moving truck. Our new house, a 2-story colonial nestled on the outskirts of town, loomed ahead, its weathered facade giving it an air of mystery. As we lugged box after box into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of apprehension that settled in the pit of my stomach. The neighbors, who had come by to introduce themselves, seemed friendly enough, but their warnings about the area being haunted or cursed had sent a chill down my spine. Once the last box was inside, I collapsed onto the worn sofa in the living room, my limbs aching from the day's work. My parents exchanged weary smiles, already discussing plans to unpack and settle in. But for me, the thought of exploring our new surroundings filled me with a mix of excitement and dread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. The house seemed to groan and settle around us, its old bones creaking with each gust of wind. The house settled into an eerie silence the following weekend. My parents, ecstatic about their escape from city life, spent most of their time unpacking, humming along to nostalgic tunes as they unearthed childhood toys and forgotten photo albums. Their obliviousness grated on me. How could they not feel the oppressive silence that hung in the air, heavier than dust motes dancing in a sunbeam? Tuesday night arrived, cloaked in a thick blanket of darkness that seemed to press against the windows like a hungry beast. My parents, ecstatic about their surprise visit to Uncle Sam, left me with a mumbled goodbye, a plate of frozen pizza, and a strict reminder to be in bed by 10. Their absence echoed in the cavernous house, amplifying every creak and groan of the aged structure. I tried to distract myself with a movie marathon, the flickering images on the screen a feeble attempt to ward off the creeping unease. Loneliness gnawed at me, and the house seemed to pulsate with a strange, malevolent energy. Around 10, the familiar symphony of crickets and owls outside my window took a sinister turn. A low, guttural growl ripped through the night, sending chills down my spine. It was unlike any animal sound I'd ever heard, laced with a deep-seated hunger that sent my heart hammering against my ribs. Adrenaline surged through me, replacing loneliness with a raw terror. I switched off the TV, plunging the room into an inky blackness. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay put, to hide under the covers and wait for morning. But a morbid curiosity, mixed with a desperate need to understand the source of the sound, propelled me forward. Grabbing a baseball bat, the only weapon I could find, I crept towards the window. The wind howled outside, whipping through the trees and rattling the loose branches. I strained to see through the darkness, but the moon was hidden behind a thick curtain of clouds, offering no help. A sudden snap of a twig directly outside my window sent a jolt of fear through me. I froze, breath hitched in my throat, bat gripped so tightly in my hand my knuckles turned white. Silence followed the snap, heavy and oppressive. My heart pounded like a drum solo in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. Just as I began to relax, a low thud echoed from below. It wasn't the settling of the house or the groan of old pipes. This thud was rhythmic, deliberate, emanating from the basement. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I knew I should run, call for help, do anything except descend into that dark, foreboding space. But a morbid fascination, a desperate need to know the source of the sound, held me captive. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me towards the basement door. My trembling hand wrapped around the cold brass knob of the basement door. The air that rushed out as I cracked it open was thick and stagnant, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else, metallic, almost. My stomach lurched, a primal sense of danger urging me to slam the door shut and flee. But before I could react, the rhythmic thudding stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, filled only with the frantic thumping of my own heart. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open wider, the single bare bulb in the basement casting a sickly yellow glow for a few feet. Beyond the light, the room stretched into an abyss of darkness, the edges lost in the shadows. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet echoed like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The baseball bat felt heavy and useless in my clammy grip. Hesitantly, I ventured deeper into the basement, the stale air clinging to me like a shroud. Cobwebs brushed against my face, sending shivers down my spine. Every shadow seemed to writhe and contort, taking on monstrous shapes in the flickering light. Then, I heard it again. Not the thudding, but the whispers. Panic tightened its icy grip around my heart. These weren't whispers from the wind, or the creaks of the old house settling. This was something else entirely, something malevolent, something ancient. My phone, with trembling fingers, I unlocked it and dialed 911. As the dial tone cut through the whispers, a terrifying realization dawned on me. The source of the whispers wasn't down here alone. There was more than one. The line connected, and the operator's voice, usually comforting, sounded tinny and distant in the face of the mounting horror. I stammered out my address, the whispers rising in a cacophony as if sensing my defiance. That's when I saw them, figures cloaked in shadow, huddled around a makeshift altar at the far end of the room. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them, their movements slow and deliberate, as if in the thrall of some unseen force. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The cloaked figures turned their attention towards me, their eyes gleaming with a malevolent intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could react, strong hands seized me from behind, dragging me into the darkness. I struggled against my captor, thrashing and twisting in a futile attempt to break free, but they were relentless, their grip like iron. My heart hammered in my chest as they bound me to a chair, my limbs immobilized, my mouth gagged to stifle my cries for help. The room seemed to spin around me as I fought to catch my breath, the air thick with the scent of incense and the sound of whispered prayers. The figures moved with an eerie grace, their movements slow and deliberate as they encircled me, their faces hidden beneath the folds of their hoods. I strained against my bonds, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, but it was no use. I was trapped, at the mercy of these dark forces. And then, as if from a nightmare, one of the figures stepped forward, a gleaming knife clutched in their hand. My heart skipped a beat as they approached, their eyes alight with unholy fervor. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the worst, but before they could strike, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the darkness. The basement door burst open, flooding the room with blinding light. Police officers stormed in, their guns drawn, their faces grim with determination. Just when I thought the air itself would crack with the weight of it all, a booming voice echoed through the house. "Stand down." It was the lead officer, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "You are surrounded. Put down your weapons." The tension seemed to stretch infinitely. Finally, with a hiss of frustration, the cloaked figures dropped their knives, their bodies slumping as if defeated. They were quickly apprehended, their movements surprisingly docile. Relief washed over me as the officers rushed forward, their guns drawn, their voices sharp commands cutting through the chaos. With trembling hands, they untied me from the chair, their touch gentle yet urgent, as if they feared the darkness might swallow me whole if they weren't quick enough. I stumbled to my feet, my limbs weak and unsteady, my heart still pounding in my chest. The basement seemed to swim before my eyes, the air thick with the scent of incense and the lingering echoes of whispered prayers. The police took statements, their voices a steady anchor in the storm of confusion and fear. As I recounted the events of that fateful night, a sense of disbelief settled over me. Had it all really happened, or was it just a twisted nightmare born of fear and exhaustion? But as the officers packed up their gear and prepared to leave, I knew that the horrors of that night were all too real. And as I watched them disappear into the night, their flashing lights casting long shadows across the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that something far more sinister lurked in the darkness, waiting to be unleashed.